Kento?
He's got it.
Huh?
No, I am.
Okay, so if you're gonna record this, click like don't be in speaker view. Be in the view where you can see everybody at the same time.
How do you do that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, because otherwise you just get like random people on the screen or whatever.
So how do I do it?
Oh.
Go to the top where it says speaker view or gallery view.
Yeah. In the beginning, it was a gallery.
I got the gallery view. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. Go.
Yeah. So interested in everybody's thought process on the assessment process, maybe particularly table assessment process, and then where that might lead with your intervention or what you're planning on doing with your client versus, verbally talking to the client and having a model in your head and seeing how they go about achieving or trying to achieve a given task.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't you start with yours?
I'll go. So a lot of the times, like before, I was a lot more reliant on the test to give me an idea of what I was doing and where I was going. The tests now are less for me and more for the client, because I think what we talked about last week, it has to have some meaning for them, right? Like they have to be able to figure out and sense what's going on or sense a difference between the here and now and after said intervention, because none of this stuff makes any sense to them. They're coming in blind, so to speak. So a lot of the table tests when we had access to tables was really just getting them to feel, hey, I can't do X, or this feels a certain way, or this is off in some shape, form, or fashion. And then after the intervention, whatever it is, if it's an all fours or a 90-90 variation, it comes down like when they get up and they walk around and they can sense this feels different, or we can just do the retest right there for them if they need that, if that's still something concrete for them to hold on to. But usually it's that how they navigate space afterwards can tell them, hey, something is different. This feels different than before. I don't really use it as a means of like, hey, this is what they need right now, because usually when they come in, it's respiration and it's being able to sense more efficiently. And they can't do either of those things. So almost anything that allows them access to troubleshooting that task is going to be beneficial.
Okay. So yeah, I mean that's awesome. So me personally, I kind of know a little bit of like how most of y'all think on this issue. So just me being selfish for a second, Miguel, you've like before all of this post POI shit, whatever the fuck this is, you have spent a lot of time researching FMS or SFMA tests and how that corresponds to POI and whatever, right? Yeah, can you comment on that? Like, your thoughts would be really interesting. Your hair is interesting too.
So when it comes to not just table tests, but tests overall, they give you a snapshot of where the individual is on the continuum of their development. So something very straightforward would be, FMS shoulder mobility. I think we're all kind of familiar with those words, and whether or not you're standing or you're assessing it individually, passively, that allows an individual to understand where their brain is in respect to how they reference those structures. So that's like the updated, like that's what I think now. Like if I could go into a workplace and they say they do FMS, and then I'll be like, okay, I'll do FMS, but I really know what's going on behind it. Back in the day, the table assessments would be a way for me to understand, okay, this is where we are now, this is where we go next, so on and so forth. Because it provides a very simplistic value, stepping stones for where to go in the context of, okay, this is the next level to take, this is the next level to take. So that's kind of like both ends of it. Like I could see both ends of that. So
yeah, that's legit. Yeah, so Adil, you're kind of like, you are now in a setting that's in my mind kind of similar to where Miguel, I guess, was. Yeah, can you comment on how you do this thing?
Yeah, so my our assessment process for what I have to do for work is similar to what Miguel just mentioned, but in my opinion, it's a lot of unnecessary stuff. It's actually incredibly unnecessary. But we have to go through essentially a 2-hour assessment with every client that comes in.
Fuck. Okay.
Yeah. And then after that 2-hour assessment, then we do an hour results review where it's like essentially like a Word presentation. Yeah, it's such a waste of time.
God
Do
damn.
you give them coffee during this process to keep them awake?
No, they literally do. They get La Colombe coffee from this $10,000 coffee machine we have in our facility.
Fucking hell.
I swear to God. But it's also like Equinox has these particular things called e-clubs, which are like these, like, I guess you could say, like premier lounges for people to come in. They spend like $5,000 to put down. It's like $1,500 a month. And then they have to buy like training sessions on top of that. But they try to create a luxury experience for people that are willing to pay that, also to be in isolation so they don't have to be amongst peasants and the masses, for lack of better terms.
Is that a bunker? Is that a bunker as well?
It's essentially, yeah, it was for me for the 2 weeks prior to being in quarantine. But they had so basically what we do is we have to go through a postural assessment where we have to literally have there's this app called Posture Pro. Kento, you might have seen it. I think it started in like PT world.
Not Kento's PT world.
Yeah. Thankfully. But you basically take like postural assessments, you take a picture, you run it through this software, it tells you where their alignment is structurally. And then we have to go through FMS. We put them on this Fit 3D system that scans circumferentially sites of their body and all that jazz. But personally for me, like, this is all just an opportunity to establish rapport and establish, again, that beginning process of state sharing with the client. We have a bunch of other parts of the assessment as well. Like we do like an active metabolic assessment, resting metabolic assessment. We do like a full lifestyle questionnaire. But all of this, I look at it as, this is going to give me more insight into seeing what I'm going to see from you when you move. And then, for me right now, where I'm at in my phase of development career-wise, I'm trying to take the pieces of what I hear from them and then connect it to what I see from them, just so I can, in my mind, establish the understanding of what those two pieces, or how those two pieces correlate. But in terms of like the actual like validity of the testing and such, I don't know, like I having worked with Mike and even like seeing the stuff that Joe posts and things I've practiced with you, Colby, I feel like the table tests, like Joe said, they offer a opportunity for the client to see where things are limited, which they may not previously be aware to. But that comes, in my opinion, more from the actual experience of, hey, can you execute this thing? And if you are executing it, how do you do this? For me, I'm able to visually see what somebody is able to do with their pelvis just by how they lift their hips off the ground in a 90-90, or what they do in an all fours. And it just, I don't know, it makes things more seamless for me from a recognition standpoint. And it also makes the experience more humane, which is kind of what I would say is the baseline place to start from anyway.
Yeah, no, that's legit. Yeah, Kobe, how do you do?
Well, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was attempting to just run through the PRI model, maybe sprinkle in some other tests that I had picked up along the way, and I would get frustrated. Because I wasn't 100% confident in my own testing ability, so that was probably a confidence issue on my part. But I was also really getting frustrated because I would test, say, adduction drop, and do something and it would improve, and then they'd come in the following session and it wouldn't have stuck. And then I felt like I kept doing the same thing over and over, and then the client buy-in at that point, or their trust in you starts to waver a little bit if you are just striving to get this one thing to improve, instead of really having a conversation with them and asking them, what are they actually looking for? And more importantly, how do they feel? And after you do something with them, how does that change how they feel? And not necessarily just what they feel, but how do they feel? Do they feel, better after the drill? Has it changed their mood in a better or worse way? So tracking that has become more important for me. And now when I have a new client, a lot of it is just like watching them walk, trying to figure out as I watch them move, how they move, excuse me, how does that match up with how I think they should move through the lens of now fascial loading, rotational capabilities through their body, and kind of that elastic recoil that I have in my mind of how fascia should work. And then watching them do simple things like bending over into a hinge, squatting, getting in an all fours position, and you can learn a lot about how their brain is trying to orchestrate that. But I'll be honest, I still, I see a lot of other professionals out there that are still doing a lot of testing, and I do feel sometimes that I should be doing it, but I don't.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be a very interesting talking point. I want to sort of get on when we're done here with this little segment. Your work wife, how do you do it? Kento, that's you, my work wife.
Hi, honey. The way I look at it is, I pretty much am in line with mostly everyone here, I think. So I'm going to simplify with what I think of it is, depending on what the individual wants, right, compared to what the individual needs, because I think what they want is probably first, then needs later, almost. And then from there, I use both. I use the objective table testing along with gait assessment, movement assessment, along with their subjective intake, and see how that correlates to each other. So if the objective testing tells me, like, I don't know, shoulder IR is negative and adirection drop test is negative, but they present all these behaviors that tells me they tend to be a, let's say, PEC-minded individual. That tells me there's a disconnect or dissociation between those two. So what does that mean to me or the individual? So I still use it. Like table testing, I think it's still essential in a sense where it still sometimes guides us, or it just gives me information. How I do with the information depends up to me, really, right? So, and from a physical therapy world, doing tests is a form of communication between each other. So let's say if either of us disagree with it, let's say, oh, your shoulder IR is negative, like there's 90 degrees to it. And then if Mike does it, and he goes, no, it's like 45 degrees. And that just gives me an opportunity or stimulus to communicate with him what each of us means. I don't really care if it stays the same or if it is agreeable or not agreeable. It's really just a form or a stimulus in order to communicate with each other.
Yeah, it's a lexicon, it's a language. Yeah, it has something that carries over. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like piggybacking on what Kobe was saying, with respect to, like, you see people that over relying on testing, and then of course there's like people that don't test anything, but that's not here or there. Yeah, you have a lot of people that are diving into this level of operation, this level of performance from a coaching standpoint, and client and case management standpoint, that they it's like their first exposure to real testing that yields some kind of a resonance with what they see in their client, and then they see that as like the gold standard or whatever the fuck. And of course we all see here that there are limitations to that. And sort of like I went along in all of this in my own development or whatever, I realized kind of what the limitation is in that it's not a bad thing, obviously. And like Kento was saying, it's a powerful tool of communication, these table tests, these passive tests, these laboratory tests. But, we have to know the limitations of it, right? And a big part of it, it's like Kento was saying, the subjective desires of the client is a lot more important than the objective needs. They may not be aware of their objective needs, like we are. And even after they become aware of it, who's to say if they even care, right? So the way I do it now, it's generally when people come to folks like us, there's something they cannot do. There are things that they cannot do, and I think this sort of like bleeds into like us non-physical therapists like covering our asses, kind of, in that we can't talk too much about pain, right? I mean, everybody works in pain. Whether you like it or not, it's like neurology or psychology. You're in that world, whether you like it or not. Human beings have that. You can't not do that. It's what you do with it, right? But anyways, so if somebody has like chronic shoulder pain or whatever, it's not like they're not doing anything and then their shoulder's like, hey, here, we hurt or whatever. They discover that through doing certain daily activities that weren't problematic before and now becoming problematic. And like, you know, injuries aside or whatever. But like, so in my mind, there's always something that they cannot do, right? For me, that's the test, whatever that is, right? Whatever that is that they cannot do. They can't get their shoulder overhead. Well, that's the test, right? That's my adduction drop test. That's my adduction lift test, whatever the fuck, right? Because for me, that combines both worlds. Obviously, it's something they care about. And for me, if I can understand it well enough, then you know, it'll do both things. It allows me to see where they're at with respect to the subconscious processes, and then it allows me and the client to communicate with respect to where they're at consciously. I bring in table tests when I cannot make sense of the task, whatever it is. Meaning, I'll do X, Y, and Z, and they have difficulties, and then we'll identify what it is, and then whatever intervention will be changing that functionality. If that doesn't make sense, whatever it is that they are using as references makes sense to me, theoretically in my mind, and then you know, the outcome that should have come around from or resulted from that reference does not come around, and you know, I would keep modifying my approaches, and then it never begins to make sense. It never ends up making sense. Then I go to table test. What the hell am I missing? Like, what am I not understanding about the situation? But until then, you know, I sort of just do this thing on the fly, even though obviously it's not. That way they're in the game, and they can very easily feel that I'm interested in the thing that they are interested, rather than, hey, shut the fuck up right now, get on this table, no, right? Where it's like, that's a common thing, right? It's a common thing, and they will, yeah, like in my mind, it's like, if your patient or client asks you, why are we doing this? You know, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary, but if you know what I'm saying, if that's something that's on their mind a lot during that hour, you need to look at what you're doing, right? But yeah, thoughts on that?
I had a question, maybe. So along that line of thinking, so say somebody comes to you with the example you had of they can't lift their shoulder over their head, right? That's the first session you have with them. You do something that first session to elicit a change in them being able to lift their arm over their head. If I'm under the assumption that they're going to see you for more than one session or indefinitely, do you quickly have kind of a hierarchy in your head of skills that you want to teach them, and then maybe session 2 you go right into that? Or like, when do you wean off of what they came in to you with and then start going down the path of what you want them to be able to do?
Can I possibly comment on that, Mike?
Of course.
So Colby, I think the question is even before the skill part that you're talking about. It's the question, so let's say they came, so this is how, and this is, I'm going sales direction right now because, you know, I've been in the business coaching group. So, you know, when we are just looking at pain or a certain specific activity, we lost because you're looking at a short-term aspect, really quick.
Yep.
So when you go into the person, what you immediately talk about is the shoulder thing, because that's what they came in for. But beyond that, you're looking for what they are actually wanting beyond that. So meaning, let's say they have an overhead issue, right? It's like, okay, what are the things you can't do with your overhead? Like, what are you missing from it? And you're like, oh, I'm missing doing overhead pressing. It's like, okay, so what do you get out of overhead pressing? It's like, oh, like I feel really good about it. I feel stronger. I feel great. I feel like I'm empowered. And that's what they're looking for. I can go further down the path a little bit more, right? Or it's a thought process of, because I am a good overhead presser, I can hang out with, let's say, strong first people, and I sense a sense of community. I feel belonged. right? That's, if you go deep into it, that's when you know how you can progress. But if you just look at the overhead issue only, you will be stuck very, very quickly. That's it for me.
I like
What
that.
do you mean stuck?
Say what?
What do you mean stuck?
Oh, the practitioner will get stuck at times when you get to the point, it's like, oh, let's say the overhead press got cleaned up.
I see.
And they, in plan of care, at least from a physical therapy perspective, your plan of care might just end versus like, hey, there's more to this.
Yeah.
You just have to sprinkle that in, because personal trainers in the greatest way, I think it's great for like for us, for like guys like me, you guys continue the things that I can't progress per se, or they don't think I can progress.
Right.
So it's like, oh, great, Mike, Joe, Miguel, everyone else saying, hey, can you just help him do that? Because they don't think I am a lifetime person.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, it's super interesting because, you know, like as I'm listening to you detail how you do this, and at first I was like, oh fuck, I don't do that. That's awesome. I'm learning. And then as you elaborate on like the stuck thing, and I was like, oh, I do it in my own like low tech way or whatever. in that so back to Kobe's question, and you know, when they come in a second session, I kind of don't add on to new things if I don't see you know, some kind of a transition or whatever. So if we're talking about very easy clients on one end who are like fellow professionals who aren't idiots, who get it, and then on the other end, sort of fucking pains in the ass that really want you to become them so that you can fix their body, their brain, and stuff like that. The example I'm talking about is somewhere in the middle, right? Somewhere in the middle. They're, you know, reasonably reasonable, but they don't know what the hell they're doing. But they know that they don't know what they're doing. So anyway, so they come in and they're, you know, I would be like, how is it? And let's say they say, oh, I still can't X, Y, and Z, right? And then I'm like, all right, cool. So that sets a point in history in my mind, in a narrative. So all right, cool. So that's where they're at. Well, let's see what it means. It may not mean what they think it means, but let's investigate. I'm not gonna just automatically invalidate that. So I would be like, all right, cool. So all right, it is still here. What was it like at the end of the session last time? And then they will say whatever. They'll be like, oh, okay, you know, I was able to do that. When I went home, I was able to, I don't know, get shit out of my cupboard, pick my kids up, whatever, no problem, and catch baseball, whatever the fuck, with my kids, no problem. And then I was like, when did it start coming back? Because right now you have it back, right? And then they would, you know, say X, Y, and Z. That maybe they didn't do homework enough, or they just be like, you know, 3 days later it began to come back, and then I was like, okay, cool. You know, how often do you homework? And they were like, you know, I was too busy. So that, right. So you want to see where they're at with the process, because as we know, instinctively, most people don't understand process. They just don't. They don't understand the process of process. They don't know what that is. And very few things in life teaches you that now, right? You want to buy something, it will be here tomorrow, you know, pandemic aside. You know, you want something done, it's very quick. Everything is very quick. Even the stuff that is not quick, you don't see the process, right? If you buy something from online or whatever and it's out of stock or it's made to order or something like that, it'll just tell you, hey, it'll be here in 2 weeks. So in your unconscious, it's like, right now it's 0, 0, 0, 0. And on the 13th day, it's still 0 rather than like 95%, you know what I'm saying? And then on the 14th day, it went from 0 to 100 in 1 day, you know? So people don't understand process. Very few people do. And so you need to get their mind into that because this leads to what Kento was saying in his like high-tech, cool, sophisticated way. In that, like, because if you can get their mind and tune their mind for process thinking, well, by the time the problem is done, they're naturally going to be like, what else can I get out of this? This process is really nice, or whatever. And I would also do that. And then, like, now that the battle's won, and I'm like, all right, cool, what goals do you have now that that's done? Like, what do you want to do now that that's done? Or something along those lines, right? I mean, that is if this takes not very long time, then they'll naturally start thinking about all these things. but you do want to pave the way, because most people that are stuck with function, it changes the way they think. It changes the way they relate to their body, and emotions comes out of the body. Like, it's like before all of this psychotherapy stuff, we all think that emotions kind of like a product of your cognition, like it's a product of like mental processes. And it's like, no, it's actually here. It's the foundation of that, and it comes from the body. So if your body's not working as fluidly as the brain expects it to, or to put it more technically, if your motor center, your motor system is not working the way other parts of the brain expect it to, it constrains on what kind of emotional, relational mechanisms you can have with yourself and others. So once that's gone, new emotions will be available. They may not know that, because as we know, it's extremely unconscious. But if you probe these questions to them as you, right? Because you are the, okay, so you know, this is hoping everybody remember textbooks and stuff. So you are the transitioning object, right? You are the transitional object, right? Think back Winnicott, right? And so for Kobe, did you read like Freud and Beyond? Okay, cool. And Shore is like the first psychotherapy, hardcore psychotherapy book you're about to go into, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So a transitional object is traditionally a teddy bear or stuffed animal or something like that. It's the, what transition are we talking about, right? It's the transition of a caregiver-centric mental model to a self-centric model. Meaning, before that, your mother is a part of your mind, because you cannot do anything. You don't know anything. You have nothing going on there. So all the regulatory things, physiological, homeostatic, emotional, comes from the mom. So she is like more you than you, if that makes sense. And so the big thing about moms from the baby standpoint is that they're squishy. They're squishy and they're warm. Well, stuffed animals are like that too, right? And so the stuffed animal is like a little version of mom as you're trying to figure out yourself. So bringing it to the clinical process, you are going to be that stuffed animal, because at first they don't have function, and they only had function with you there, right? With you there. So as they sort of internalize this, and the technique kind of, or technique or intervention or whatever is kind of like the mom, if that makes sense, right? It's something that they are doing consciously, and trying to instill that into the unconscious, into procedural memory and things like that. Because like all these different references and stuff like that, in the moment, the person don't know that. It's all procedural when it's ready, right? So as they're doing that, and they're transitioning from a explicit control to an implicit procedural control, that transition, they would want something to sort of like help them transition. Well, that's you're the stuffed animal, right? You're the stuffed animal. The conscious control is the mom, and the implicit control is still the implicit control, right? So if you would then ask them, how would you continue this? It's a much easier transition for them, right? To tap into the possibilities of, what's all there in the implicit control. Does that make sense? Yeah, thoughts? Everybody else? Comments? Whatever.
So I'm just writing some stuff down. Transitional object is referencing the therapist, or us in this case, because that allows greater conscious control over the individual. They have like that's relational in the context of this is the therapist and this is the client, and then no.
It's a little bit more complex than that. Because a transitional object, it's something that kind of reminds you, and that's still a simplification. It's a reminder that you are safe. It's a reminder that you are safe. Think about like you're doing something brand new, right? Your arm wasn't working. That's scary, right? And you're gonna have to access this part of your consciousness. That's scary. Going through it, learning whatever it is that you gotta learn, that's also scary. it actually doesn't matter that it's successful the whole time, right? And that it's pain free the whole time or whatever. It's still fucking scary, right? Because bad things that came out of that, right? Bad things and limitations had come out of that. There are two things that inspire fear with respect to people who have joint or body part or functional limitations. One is all of this uncomfortable stuff that comes out of that. Not necessarily pain. Pain obviously does that. But the tightness, the restriction, the weakness, all those things inspire fear. Primarily because you want to do something and then something from inside you tells you you can't do that. Right, and that's not an argument that individual can win. Right, it's not like, I don't know, everybody, me saying, everybody fuck this, let's go use FaceTime. And then somebody says, no, let's not do that. And then we can have a discussion on it, right? Like we can actually negotiate. Like, somebody can change my mind, as an example. But with a situation like this, you cannot win that argument, right? If your arm doesn't work, the arm tells you, hey, we can't do that. There's not a damn thing you can do to like change that unless you break something. I don't know, right? So that message telling you, hey, you can't do this, that inspires fear. That inspires fear. So you're there, and they're seeking you out, partially to deal with the fear, because if they're smart enough, they will know that the best way for me to deal with this fear is fix this problem. This fear is not psychologically hollow, if that makes sense. Right. So the best way to deal with that best way to deal with the fear is to deal with the thing. So as they move forward, meaning the problem is done, they can do whatever it is that they got to do. Well, that's just the mechanical, physiological component of it. The fear is still there, right? Their brains, their psychology, their emotional mechanisms still expect things to go bad. Right, and you're like you're literally a stuffed animal. You're not in that sense, in that period of time. After they're done, and you guys are talking about moving forward, you're not the therapist anymore. You're not the clinician anymore. You're the stuffed animal, because there's nothing to fix. So what the fuck, you're not doing anything, right? It's at that point the person in the stuffed animal is figuring out where to go next. Then you become the clinician and therapist or whatever the fuck again. Right, there's that transition, right? So in that moment, you're providing them safety and reminder that you are an external source of safety, external source of fear regulation, because they cannot do that themselves in previously or whatever, right? So that's what it does. It's like a reminder. It's like a memory device or some shit like that. I don't know. But yeah. Yes.
I just got a quick thing to add on, if that's okay. So like last week we were talking about state sharing, and in particular, like we serve as like the receiver of the client's state, right? And then through that we regulate, or we interpret, and then we produce then behaviors towards them. So when someone comes to us and we're the like transferential object for them, the way they interact with us is going to be a reflection of how they were related to, and our kind of communication, our reception of that, and our communication back to them has to match where they are at, because otherwise it would be too much of a jump from where or how they were originally related to. Meaning, like, my subjective definition of this is what a caretaker should be like can't be brought into the picture, because this person's reference is what I have to operate off of in order to get them.
Yeah, dude, that's legit. That's right.
Okay.
Oh, that was what you're saying? But yeah. You have to slowly figure out and listen, unconsciously listen, or right brain listen. What do they want? How do they want this relationship to be done? What are you? What are they in these roles? Right? Who are you to them? Are you their mother? Are you their father? Are you the right? Obviously, you're not gonna get like a label in there. You know what I'm saying? But you will get a state, right? You'll get the sense that they are trying to position themselves. They're trying to position themselves so that you can get a very specific kind of you can give a very specific kind of relationship to them. It's about the relationship, not about the individuals, if that makes sense. Right, so you gotta figure that out, right? You gotta figure that out, and you may not like it. You may not like it every time, meaning they may—
I don't most of the time.
Right, right. Because they may orchestrate things so that you are a abuser to them, or they are the abuser to you. And again, it's one of those things that's going to happen whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not. So if you know it, then you can be more effective. But yeah. So if that's the case, the thing to do is not to like sort of dispel that illusion. No. You go into the illusion, you become a part of the illusion, and you change it from within. But yeah.
I've had a lot of trouble with that. Just given like the population of people I work with who are like, very type A, very, very rigid. Um, I was fortunate. My mother was very empathic, so I usually take that approach to things. But for some people, that's so jarring to them because they're so used to 100 miles an hour, and so I've had trouble with that.
Yeah,
This piece together for me a better
no,
understanding.
for sure. Because I think I probably struggle the most with that stuff. I know it sounds crazy now, but like I probably struggle the most with it. Like I really didn't have very much empathy growing up. And yeah, that was that was a huge thing I had to learn. And I guess lucked out that I had the resources and the wherewithal to realize that this is something I really need to be able to do, but I cannot do. Yes, as I watch a lot of you guys sort of grow in this path, it's sort of like empathy. Just like, okay, it happened. I mean, education is education, and we can get better at it. But yeah, like when I first started doing stuff like that, to stop myself from correcting people with respect to that was extremely difficult. It was extremely difficult. I mean, I don't see it as like my fault or anybody's fault, but it doesn't change the fact that I wasn't able to do that. And yeah, so like, yeah, absolutely. You do have to build tolerance for that shit. There's like a skill component in that. Once you perceive it, what you can do with the information, but the information is also like a massive hot potato. You also have to learn to hold that information, and that's a separate thing in and of itself. But yeah, okay, all right, cool. All right, everybody else, where do you want to go from here?
Can I just ask a quick question in regards to the table tests? So Joe, you said you mentioned like when you have somebody do something, like you have them stand up and you have them walk around and you say, like, what do you feel? Or do you notice anything different? In instances where someone doesn't sense anything different, right? Where like they're blank, right? You're seeing a completely different body in front of you, but obviously subjectively that's more important, or what's their subjective view is more important. How do you direct your question asking in that instance where you're seeing what the client isn't feeling?
Yeah, I forgot I was on mute for a second. So that's interesting. I've had not a lot, but enough people where that's been a little bit of an issue. Like they can't appropriately sense their body, or they can't appropriately sense change. At that point, it's less about the mechanics. I mean, I think as Mike would point out, it's almost never about the mechanics in and of themselves. But what else is going on beneath all of that? The last time this happened was with my old guy, and he couldn't sense any change in his breathing mechanics. He couldn't sense expansion in his lungs. He couldn't sense anything in his torso, really. And so he was just frustrated. Like that was the underlying sensation for the day. I could sense frustration. He didn't, the tone in his voice didn't really change, but it was something that was there beneath the surface. And I asked him about it. I said, hey, so what happened this past week? Like I shifted completely from the context of like, all right, I'm frustrated because he can't sense what I need him to sense. Like this isn't moving forward. Like that kind of paradigm just got shunted out. And I said, all right, cool. Well, talk to me about this past week or this past weekend, I said. And he said, nothing really happened this past weekend. Everything was the same. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, what about this past week? Tell me what was going on outside of this stuff. And that's when he kind of offered, and he said, well, I had a really powerful session with my psychoanalyst on Tuesday. So this was on Monday. So a whole week afterwards. And so we started exploring there. And I started asking him, I asked him something, tell me about it. Tell me what was going on, what was happening. And he shared most of what the feelings that he felt. He shared some stuff about his a childhood trauma that he had like repressed for a while. And we just talked. We just talked about him processing this stuff, and more importantly, how he felt after the session, after his session with his analyst. And the thing that he was talking about was that he couldn't manage information as well as before. Like, he was getting more information, like he could see colors differently and he didn't know what the hell that meant. So he could feel stuff on his feet differently as he was walking to the train station. That morning before his session, because I see him usually at 8, he said he was on the verge of crying while he got on the subway. And for him, like, he had no idea what the hell this was. And to think about it, like, many of us, I mean, I'm speaking for myself really, but after sessions or after significant strides in our process, we're able to sense things differently. We're able to acquire different inputs and make sense of them and then try to reintegrate them into our own models. And we know what that feels like. We understand that drastic change of like, hey, if I'm getting better, why is my single leg deadlift worse than before? Right? Well, now you're working with a different model. So you've never done this thing before. You can't, there's no way in hell that you're going to be good at it. Right? And so for him, he couldn't shake this feeling of frustration that he was losing it. Right? And so his inability to sense his body and change walking around had nothing to do with that per se, but more along the lines of the recent change that was going on with him. And he was at a point where he was like willing to let me take things away from just the pure physical aspect. And that's really what we started to make a huge stride and change into his ability to sense his own body and fix a lot of his long-standing issues. Does that answer your question as to how I would approach it?
Yeah, it does. How would you tailor that conversation to someone that isn't in therapy or working with a psychoanalyst?
So for the same individual, before we were able to broach that subject, I had to figure out what he could sense, right? Like, I couldn't figure, like, we want them to sense certain things, right? But that's just us like wishing that this pandemic was over tomorrow and just ignoring reality and walking out the door, right? That's not how it works. So, all right, cool. They need to be able to sense change. So what can they sense? I had a guy, the same guy, he came in, he couldn't apically expand. He couldn't feel hip shifting, adductors, hamstrings. The only thing that this guy could sense is moving his shoulder blades when I had his back stuck against the wall. So I just had him doing this little bullshit. That was the only thing he could sense. And like rotating his neck, twisting his neck left and right. So we worked there and we kind of just proliferated around that area. So, all right, you can sense this. Great, cool. Work on this, get better at this, and then stack other things around it. Like, maybe you can sense this, and if you're playing with that, can you feel what your hips feel like when you shift? So it's kind of like redrawing the map for him, or creating a map from nothing. But that he had significant trauma in his life. So for me, it was just about, hey, it's cool, dude. Like, not trying to make him feel bad about anything, but rather letting him know that it's okay that he can't feel stuff in the here and now, and saying, well, this is just a problem that we can solve together and we can figure this out. Creating that sense of safety and not judging him, although that's not the word that I want to use, but allowing him to just be and to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of put him in a position of success because you went after areas that are pretty sensory dense. So there's a likelihood that signal would be received better than other areas that's hard to interpret and coming information from. Like by going up at the shoulders and the neck, it's easier for him to sense at least something from that area.
So yes and no. Yes, in terms of zooming out and saying that's what I did. I wasn't even thinking about that. For me, it was really just figuring out where he was at, right? Like, I wasn't even thinking about success at that point. Like, he can feel this. Like, if he could just feel him tensing his traps, we would have started there. If he could just feel him wiggling his toes, that's where we would have gone. It didn't really matter what it was that he could sense, as matters like, can you sense it? What can you sense? And then going after that. Does that make sense? Like, yes, in terms of what you were saying, in terms of the end product, but that's not where my mind was at when I was going for it.
Got it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was like hoping you would say something like that when Adil asked that second follow-up question or whatever, because everybody knows that if they can't sense their bodies, that something's wrong. That's, they may not know that they know that, but they know that, if that makes sense. Like, they may not consciously know that there's something wrong, but when they experience that, and someone they trust, that they trust with however much money they pay you, that's a level of trust, right? If somebody they trust tells them that they can't send shit, their right brain immediately knows that, oh yeah, I know that. That's not good. And that sort of just squirts a little bit more fear into, or a little bit more uncertainty / fear into this whole discourse, this whole space, right? So like I love what Joe was saying, that the first thing to do is to somehow convey to them, scratch that, somehow convince them that that's normal. That's normal, right? Not normal like, you know, a regular hand size normal, but normal considering what's happening with them, right? And that, okay, cool, here, let's try X, Y, and Z, right? So one way or another, it doesn't matter how, right? There's not like a specific how, but there is a short-term objective that is required before more, other things could happen, which is that they need to understand where they're at. What does it mean that they cannot sense whatever, right? What does it mean that they can't sense whatever? You need to convey to them. So in the beginning, in the very beginning, when that happens, I would kind of freeze, but for 1 second or so. But like in a conversation, 1 second is a long ass fucking time, right? I would freeze for like a second and either ask them the wrong questions, such as identifying a certain part of the body, or do other things so that they can feel the thing that I want them to feel. It's like you get up, you should feel more heel, you should feel more relaxation in your lower back, right? I would do things so that they can feel that more, right? And obviously at this point, I know dick about psychology. And these days, I would be like, all right, cool. You don't feel X, Y, and Z, right? That's not abnormal at all. Let's see what that means. Verbatim, I will say that. I will be like, all right, let's see what that means, that you cannot sense these things. And then we'll start digging. I will probably go back to the same exercise, right? Whatever it was I was doing. I'll probably go back to the same exercise and just sort of see in my mind how they were doing. It allows me fuel to have a bigger microscope to see the way they were doing certain nuances within the exercise, what would telegraph their inability to sense things, right? And it may very well take us down to the path that Joe just mentioned. Maybe, 9 times out of 10, it is that, right? That something's going on in their right brain that has shifted their priorities of incoming sensations. Right, and there'll be things that they do with certain parts of the body, depending on the exercise, that will allow us to see what that is. But yeah, we're doing time. Okay, cool. We're probably time for one more. Right, somebody who hasn't presented a question or some shit.
Actually, I actually had more questions for Colby when he had the first question he talked about in the text. So when you said it, where'd he go? There you go.
You scared him off.
When you first talked about the table testing aspect of how look the objective assessment, and there's a second part where you kind of said looking at behavior and how they should behave, and you're kind of versus that. I kind of want to see kind of more I guess I want to know the deeper reasoning behind that question, because I feel like I believe we're answering in a superficial level currently still to what you are looking for.
Trying to remember how I phrased it.
I can comment. I can read it for you. Hold on.
Yes, please.
Give me 1 second.
So you're talking about not what I said earlier, but what the text I sent.
Yes. Let me read it verbatim.
Okay.
A lot of models models / assessments out there theorize about what the individual client's compensational patterns / behaviors are based off of table tests and take a very specific individual approach to reverse those back to the norm. So thus they try to correct each compensation in succession. What are people's thoughts on that versus having a model in mind of how a human movement system should behave and start teaching drills / movements that elicit that behavior immediately rather than get bogged down in fixing table tests?
Okay, so the this started, I don't know how long ago. I had a question with Mike after a session or before a session where my mindset was, if you have an individual in front of you and you measure X, Y, and Z that is individual to them. So if there are 5 people in the room, they would be the only ones with this presentation. Should that be more important to you when you go to intervene than treating them just as a human being and having an idea of what a human being should be capable of? So like, is it more important the individual assessment or the model you have of what a human being should be capable of, and going after that one, and with the mindset of, if you go after that, the individual things that are going on with them will resolve, versus you might go after the individual things first and not get towards the global improvement that you want. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, Kento, what were you gonna say?
No, like I feel like there's more to it. And I'm gonna just go into the direction of what you are looking for be within that. And I'm just gonna go into feelings. Is that all right, Colby?
Sure.
Talk about feelings here. So what I'm seeing is like what you feel like is right or wrong, almost. Like, I'm not so sure. Like, you're scared of being right or what's wrong. Is that a couple things?
Well, I definitely would say that I'm always, since the beginning, have been unsure of personally of my process, and I often like to talk to people that I respect in the business or in the profession, to almost, I don't want to say measure, but to see, okay, and what I'm doing making sense in relation to, somebody that I respect and I know is doing things that I want to be able to do. Does that make sense?
No, it does, because I totally get the sense for myself when I see like Bill Hartman talk about certain things, or Mike or whoever else, right? Like, Instagram is like the best way to feel inadequate as shit. So it's one of those things, right? So when I do see those things, what I try not to make that my measurement point. Because if I do measure compared to how another person thinks, so let's say, for example, for everyone knows in this group, Mike is brilliant. He knows that already, so I'm going to put it out there, right? So, but we've all done this. When we start first talking to Mike, we feel inadequate as shit because he's so fucking good, right? At a certain point, I guess for me, being a parent really helps. At a certain point, you're just like, it doesn't really fucking matter if I'm better or worse or anything of that nature. I just have to be me, and I just have to be improving or whatever I need to do, so tomorrow I become a more evolved version of myself, right? So when I saw that text question, I was like, oh, that's an interesting question, but I don't think that's the question. I think you're asking if I'm right or wrong. And my answer to you is like, there's no way you're right or wrong. I
definitely think that a huge part of that question you're touching upon, probably unconsciously, I was thinking that. I think the other part of it is, well, I guess going along those lines is, maybe this is a different question, is there ever knowing whether you're right or wrong, and the uncertainty of not knowing, like how do you guys deal with that, is probably more of along the lines of a better question.
Right.
Is because of what we do and what we deal with is so complex. On a daily basis, you encounter things that either make you question what you do, or can drastically influence what you do the next session or the next day, which is even more disrupting probably to your mindset and your approach. So how do you guys deal with that? And how do you guys have, like, how does that affect on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, how you approach what you do?
Kento?
I love that. That's a good question to me. I think we're getting there. Mike, what do you think? I think we're getting closer.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so okay, so we are unfortunate in that we're in the industry that we're in. So most of the people that you hear talking about this either have no business talking about it, or they don't know anything, and they know that they don't know anything about it. With respect to dealing with this ambiguity, dealing with this limbo between don't know and know. Because we generally label not knowing as something bad and knowing as something good, right? And so when you don't know something, for example, when you feel inadequate because you found a mentor or teacher or whatever, you initially you label that as something bad. You know, I don't want to feel this way, whatever. And now the objective becomes the feeling rather than the thing that you're doing, whatever it is, right? Learning from this person, whatever it felt, right? Because I obviously feel it from Mary and all the other people I met in that circle. It's like it's ridiculous. Anyways, so and our literature, like the literature in our field, offers zero example in what it feels like to deal with that and to harness that that dichotomy, because you're what you're trying to get at is when two approaches seem so different. How do I move forward? Which one do I take, right? One is the table test and microscopic focus, and then the other one is like optimal human function, macroscopic focus. Like which do I take, right? And this is a okay. Yeah, I mean, you do what you do. This is recorded, so you can just come back for it. So yeah, Kento, Kobe left because he's got a client, but we're recording, so that's okay. But yeah, so once you have something like this, you need a model, and this model will not be conscious. Well, rather, it will not exclusively be conscious. There will be a subconscious component to this model. Anyways, you need a model that can oversee the relationship between the two in a nuanced way, rather than this is right or this is right. It's not or. You need a perspective, a model, a perspective, a framework that allows you to break them down into constituent pieces and then reconstruct into something else, right? So to Kobe's original question, do you focus on the microscopic, myopic issue, or do you think about, what a human being should be able to do? My answer would be, with respect to the actual case, which of these two approaches, or rather, of all the characteristics of the two approaches, which within both camps are important and constructive, then you take them individually from these two approaches and make it your own and go forward, right? Rather than, I'm going to go here and fuck everything here, or I'm going to go here and fuck everything here. No, take from both what you like. Miguel, why do you have a picture like that? That looks like children about to get raped. Okay, thank you. That's much better. But anyways, yeah. So it's unfortunate that in our field there's not a lot of models like that. And for everyone here that have dove into relational psychoanalysis, you notice they don't say this is the relational school. Whereas everything before that, it's like object relation, that's a school of thought, right? Self-psychology, that's a school of thought, because it's its own system, right? Relational is not that. Relational, because it's called relational perspective, right? Relational perspective, what it is taking everything that has come before it, the whole 100 years of it, and holding on to it, what is useful. Right. So this perspective is fluid the whole time. There's not tenets to it, if that makes sense. The only thing that holds it together, the only structure it has, is that there are three things in treatment that you need to consider, you need to manage: the self, the internalized objects within the self, and the interactions between the self and the other person, right? So, and how, that doesn't matter. Whatever the clinician likes with respect to the whole history of development, right? So, and you know, it's like, remember back into what Mitchell was writing, a lot of these schools seem to disagree with each other. However, you as the clinician, you have a choice to make. You can be down in that disagreement game and figure out the superiority of whoever, right? Or you can just pick and choose what you like, little things, characteristics from each that you like. And then you just, right, you know, it'll be the equivalent of like you going to a supermarket and you are only gonna get oranges. Or next day for another meal, you're only gonna get apples. You're only gonna, no, you're gonna get whatever you want, right? Same thing here, right? So back to Kobe's original question, it's just whatever the case requires, and it will be different every time, and certain things will be applicable, right? And it's not to say that starting out you have nothing. It's not that you will never have like a neutral starting point. You will always be biased, but you need to recognize your bias and then supplement your bias from things outside of your bias, right? So for me, you know, it's probably not surprised to hear that I'm more on like the what can a human being, what is a human being supposed to be able to do, right? I know that's my bias, right? I know that's my bias. If I don't watch my shit, I'm gonna forget details. I'm gonna forget physiological things. Well, so then going in, right, that's my starting point, right? And then I collect data as I need that tells me what physiological things does this person need, because the system-based things, systemic things that this person needs, I'm thinking about that anyways. I'm thinking about that before you came in, right? I'm thinking about that the moment this person emailed me, right? That's just on my mind all the time anyways, right? So in other words, what do I have to supplement my current biases for, right? If you assume that your bias will be neutral just because you are taking on this comparative view, you're probably gonna be lost. You're probably gonna be lost. Yeah, does that make sense? Comments, everybody?
I like the last little bit.
Yeah.
Wait, what? Say that again?
I like the last bit that you mentioned where you talk about the biases and the supplement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Kento, does that feel right to what he was asking with respect to like what is right and the approach to like what is right?
Yeah, I really liked it because it was kind of showing how your brain works a little bit more too. Because I was kind of interested in that because you have a always, you can talk whatever really. You kind of have this knack to have the ability to find truth in a sense, more than anyone else that I have ever met, if anything. So that was really cool to see that because I think. You know, I don't want to speak for Colby in this case, but you know, the question that I saw, I was like, there's something not like grabbing to me what he's trying to ask. That's what I kept on asking. It was like, you don't really care about the models that we're talking about. That's not what you care about. I bet you care about which one is right. And that's why I asked a little further. So, you know, that's the more important parts where like what you say or what Joe says, Miguel Adele says, we all have things that are very useful for anyone, really. But it depends on the person how you want to use that information and then make it your truth in a sense. And the way I see how you look at it is you get more information to find patterns that is more truthful or backs it up more, right? That gives us more this direction. Am I incorrect to say that, Mike?
No. That's absolutely it. It's absolutely it's you know, because you need assumptions, right? You can't not have assumptions. If all you have is data, well, you know, it's like you're not gonna do anything with that. But I think a lot of people, because if that's a spectrum, if two ends of the spectrum, a lot of people only stay on one end of the spectrum, either data or either all assumptions. And a lot of people don't, from what I can tell, a lot of people don't know how to be here because being here is uncomfortable. Being here gives you the most possibilities, and that's a scary thing, right? If anything is possible, or if many things are possible, well, then that's all the more opportunities for you to be wrong, right? And you know, some people talk about like, oh, you know, embrace being wrong. That's a awkward way of expressing this, because you're not going to go look for being wrong. It's not like, oh, there's a car coming, let's go, you know, let me get in front of it. You know, it's like you're not looking for being wrong. You know, for me, you know, I've sort of swung the other way in that you want to be right all the time. Just don't be mad when you're wrong, right? You want to be right all the time. It's just that when you when mistakes come, first of all, they should be a surprise. Don't be like looking for mistakes. Your attention should be spent elsewhere. Like how can it be right? Just that when wrong comes, and you know it's going to come, right? You know it's going to come. Be ready for it. Have a system for how to process being wrong, right? And so I think it's not like people think of it as like this dichotomy. You either should be a wrong or mistake-driven oriented person, or a achievement-oriented person, or whatever. And it's like, no, the world is always both. How can you combine the two? So it's like it's all these different balances that you have to make. It's like a seesaw, but like it's like 18 fucking seesaws on top of each other or something like that, you know, at different angles. So it's like you're balancing right and wrong, and you're balancing what Kento you were saying. You're balancing assumptions versus data. You want to be here. You want to be in the middle of like all these opposing, impossible scenarios where you know you're not going to be comfortably wrong. You're not going to be comfortably right either. Yeah, ambiguity is because then nothing's leading you. It's another balance between external input and internal spontaneity. But yeah, so I don't. I'm gonna gamble here. I don't think Kobe would mind, so I'm gonna talk about this a little bit. In that, you know, this is one.
Wait. What? Sorry. What's the category about? Before because it's in recording. I don't want to do that to Kobe. If it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
Why don't we ask him? I don't know what it is, but when you said gamble, I just want to make sure. You know, he's okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's not here, so we'll talk about that next time.
I think that's better. Is that cool?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No worries.
Just for Kobe's sake.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can gamble on something else about me if you want, like whatever.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, shit. I have nothing really. How about I have to leave in like 8 minutes anyway. But what have you been learning in the past couple days regarding language? How about that?
Okay, so guys, I'm reading this book. I'm reading this. I'm reading this, and then the chapters are very, very simple. I mean, the chapter titles are very simple. Right, so it's really just 4 main chapters, really just 3 chapters, you know what I'm saying? Like there's an introduction, but whatever. So essentially it breaks down to verbal communication, non-verbal communication, and the integration between the two, right? And I got done with, you stupid, oh my God. I got done with the verbal communication part, and I realized over the last, I don't know, 2 years or so, I've learned like a tremendous amount about nonverbal communication. I can, you know what I'm saying? I can talk about nonverbal communication a lot. I don't know dick about verbal communication. So I was like, let me fix that. So I went to Amazon and bought a bunch of books, as I do. And you know, it's like psycholinguistics. It's a new field, it's a very, very new field. It's called psycholinguistics, and it's, you know, it's a multidisciplinary field about the science of language. You know, psychologically, neuroscientifically, and behaviorally. So, and it was an amazing thing. I mean, I know a little bit about language. You know, it's like all bilingual people know, you know, a bit about language. You know what I'm saying? Because you get to see the different grammars and like, you know, universal grammar. Because like yeah, there's this guy that invented or pioneered the study of language. His name is Noam Chomsky. Everybody has heard his name for the most part, but a lot of people don't know why he's famous. Kind of like Einstein, he's famous. We don't know why, that kind of thing. But anyways, so Noam Chomsky, he posited the existence of universal grammar in all natural languages. And we make a distinction between natural languages and artificial languages. Artificial languages are just for research. They don't actually exist. You don't encounter that. Natural language always has a noun, verb, and adverb. So it's kind of like relationships. There is a self, there is a other, and then there's a relationship between the two. Yeah, like there are some pretty fucking powerful connections. So one thing that's pretty insane is that language processing follows a very strict hierarchy. It starts with syntax. Syntax is the relationship between words in a given sentence. So it's not the words themselves, it's not the definition of the words, it's how words relate to each other. So it will be like, so the example would be like the ship. The syntax is the word the being in front of the word ship. But illegal syntax would be ship the. Does that make sense? Right? Like in English language, people don't speak like that. So that's an illegal syntax. So if I were to say the ship is sinking, that's all legal syntax, right? And you are able to make sense of it. But if I were to say ship the is sinking, well, all you know is something's sinking. You know, like until you come back to that sentence, it's like, what the fuck was that? Oh, you're an idiot. You meant to say the ship is sinking. But like until you have that second step, you will not know what the sentence is talking about, because the way we extract meaning first, it has to be a syntactically legal start of the sentence. Once that's there, then we process what the words mean, which is to say, then we form connections between the words and the concepts that they are referring to. Because words are just labels, right? It could be A, B, and C, or whatever, meaning like in a primitive version of English, it's not possible. It's not impossible that there would just be 26 concepts you can possibly talk about, right? A could be penis, B could be vaginas, C could be buttholes. Like these all are important things, right? Like D could be food. You know what I'm saying? Like it would just be that, right? That's not any different neurologically and psychologically from the words themselves, right? There's the concept and then there's the label, right? So step number one is syntax. Step number two is meaning of the word, definition of the words, identification of the words. And then step number three is what concepts, semantic concepts, do they link to? And so another way of looking at it is the scale of it goes larger, and larger, right? Think back to Kendall, think back to principles. That's exactly how every sensory modality works, right? So, and you know, obviously that matches brain, just how the brain is organized. It's more, first more micro, and then more macro, and then more macro, and then right? So, that's it's very clear to me then. Language is kind of, or whatever language it is, it's a more sophisticated form of a given sensory experience. Meaning verbal language, that's just high level hearing. Written language, that's just high level seeing, right? And so like, that's why language centers, they're not in, for example, like the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe. They are in the respective sensory strips, right? We've all heard Broca's area. That's where speech production is largely localized. And Wernicke's area, he's German, so it's probably Wernicke's area. It's the comprehension part, right? Well, that's just in the auditory strip, right? But yeah, so yeah, because Broca's area is in the motor strip, because speech production, right? Yeah, so it's not this unique thing. Obviously, it is unique, but it's not this unique thing, right? So there's that, and then one I guess part of this psychoanalysis book that drove me to it was talking about how so when you say things, you have to leave things out. You are never ever able to say everything you mean. That's not possible. And I'm like, why is that not possible? You know me, it's like somebody tells me you can't do it. I'm like, give me a second, I'm gonna figure out how to do it, right? So I'm like, why? And then as the more I think about it, I'm like, well, yeah, he's right. If I'm thinking about a table, I can only, if this table is unique or something, I can only mention each characteristic one at a time. I can't like say everything at the same time simultaneously. It's a sequence, right? It's a sequence. It has to be a sequence. So, and I remember in Master and Emissary, that dude McGilchrist talks about how the left brain specializes among the many things, specializes in sequencing, right? And then the right brain, among all the super important things that it specializes in patterns. And you can't have a pattern if all you know is the sequence. Then that means you know what comes after what, but the things that had gone before, you no longer have that. A pattern, you have everything, right? A pattern is where you have everything. And obviously right brain is more visually dominant, but again, not for the PRI vision reason. Right brain is more visually dominant for relational contact, right? For relational mechanisms, because you need to see your mother, you need to see the face, you need to see, right, the other set of eyes or whatever. So now I realize visual images gives you simultaneous information. It's a simultaneous presentation of information. Everything you're going to see, if you were to see it, if your eyes are okay, you'll see it all at the same time, right? Left brain, that is more conscious, that is more language-based, well, just the constraints of the physical universe makes it so that you have to make sounds in sequence. You cannot make sounds simultaneously. One vibratory object cannot produce two different frequencies at the same time. That's not possible, right? That's not possible. So left brain is about sequence. Right brain is about simultaneity and patterning. And you need two of them together to really live and make sense of things. You can't have either, right? Yeah, so that's one of the things I sort of like learned about this. That's one of the things I learned about. I mean, there's more. If you ask me like specific questions, it'll probably come out. But like, yeah. So Adil, this sort of like relates to some of the things that we talk about, and that like, it's always scary to think that you forgot something, right? And right now, you asked me to like just summarize everything I've learned. I'm only going to talk about like, I don't know, certain things. I'm not going to talk about everything, right? I'm not talking about everything. But I know for a fact, if you looked into the book and you ask me questions from the book, I'll probably will tell it, right? I'll probably be like, oh, this is, you know what I'm saying? You ask me definitions, I'll probably will, blur that shit out. But yeah, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know that for sure, right? I know that for like, I don't know, 75% sure, right? Yeah, so you're not gonna know everything. You're not gonna know everything you read, even if you're really good at reading it or whatever. But that's something that you, to a degree, need to be comfortable about, and then just like build on that as time goes on. But yeah, back to the language thing. Hi. Yeah, but yeah, back to the language thing. Yeah, so another thing is they've proven pretty well, because the book that I'm on, it's like one of the Oxford handbooks, so it's like a 1,000-page handbook, and it's their second edition, which is updated 2 years ago, so it's very very current, and all the citations are like in 2010 and things like that, so it's really fucking new, up to date. But yeah, one of the things is that they've now proven pretty well that one, language is syntax driven, like I said before. Two, all language, sign language and verbal language, obtain their data from a common knowledge base, right? Which, you know, it's like your long-term memory system. And this knowledge base, it's a bi-hemispheric database, right? Meaning emotions are a part of it, emotional experiences, affect is a part of it, and obviously conscious experiences or whatever lexical content is another part of it. But yeah. So that's what I've got going on so far. But yeah, all right. Thoughts, comments on that while Kento's playing with his baby.
I thought it was really interesting. You said, you know, ever since you started talking more about how one part of the brain is more linear and the other one is not as linear. Hi, picking your nose.
Yeah, that's excellent.
There you go. Stop picking.
No, you don't have to stop. Just do what you want. Do whatever you want. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Let him do it both at the same time.
Yeah.
Say hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
That's Mike.
Hi.
Hi, nice.
Hi, Miguel.
Hi, Mimi.
Hi, girl.
Hi, Adele.
Hi, girl.
I do. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, Miguel, what were we saying?
I have no idea. No, you're talking about right brain. I think the word you used, simultaneity, and left brain was sequentially with respect to processing information. But you were thinking of it as, I'm just trying to understand, right brain, you intake information to visual aspects, so you see things simultaneously?
Well,
Is that what you're referring to?
so that's well, kind of. So the right brain. Yeah. So the you stupid. So the right brain, everything that the right brain does serves one function and one function only, which is to establish a relationship with another person. We establish a connection with another person. This is a perfect example. We're talking about this, so then memory came up. So another thing that I figured out, and this is related to the question, Miguel, is that verbal communication serves a very specific purpose, and nonverbal communication serves a completely different but complementary purpose. Nonverbal communication establishes relationships, establish connections, right? Meaning you're able to become one with someone else, and you can only do that through nonverbal communication. Verbal communication modifies that, modulates that, but you have to have a connection before you can modulate a connection, right? So meaning if you just talk in monotone, no one gives a fuck about what it is that you're talking about or whatever, right? They may be interested in like what the fuck's wrong with you, right? But they don't actually, you know what I'm saying? But if you talk from the heart, so to speak, that's what happens when your left and your right are integrated, which is to say your right driving the left, right? So you're modulating that connection forming, I guess, beam for the purpose of establishing a new connection with someone, but you need left and right, right? So Miguel, what you were saying with respect to the right brain visual simultaneity and stuff like that, all those things are there to build and construct a relationship between two people, right? So visually driven, right brain visually driven, it has nothing to do with posture. Is the right brain cares about posture insofar as the right brain is able to talk to another right brain in its own way, in its non-verbal way. It has nothing to do with posture. It's why a lot of those things don't work. And more importantly, the left side of the body does not drive the right brain. The right brain utilizes the left side of the body to establish communication, unconscious communication emotionally driven communication with another human being. Right? It's also why like left side driven drills don't work for the things that we want them to work for. Yeah. And you know, I can see that if you're researching this and you just don't know about the therapy part, this as in the right brain specialization stuff, and you don't know the therapy part, it will be like, okay, left body, da 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 da. And it's like once you see all of that research, it completely changes everything. It completely changes everything. But yeah, and yeah. Oh, Kento, you gotta go.
I have to go. So we're seeing it right now. So let's meet again next week.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry guys, I have another team meeting that I have to go to.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Hey, thanks everyone.
Bye, guys.
See ya. Should we put a pause on what we got? Oh, I guess Mike left. All right, see ya.
I'll get a recording. No worries. I'll get you in the recording.
All right.